with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. As bizarre as it sounds, there have been a couple of cases recently of people who impersonated being Hasidic. I don't even know they were Jewish. There was a gunman dressed in a Hasidic disguise during a 2021 NYC murder. He was just arrested recently. And in Texas, another very interesting but strange story of a man who impersonated a Hasidic Jew, adopted 9 boys, charged of molesting them. And the man he changed his name to Chaim Nissen Cohen, but he had a different name. To discuss it right now is Asher Lovy. He's with an organization called Zaakah. They're dealing with sexual abuse. So thank you for joining us, Asher.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I found this a very bizarre story. Perhaps you can give us some insight. Chaim Nissen Cohen, there's a picture of him. He's dressed in Hasidic garbs, and he adopted 9 children, 9 boys. And then it turned out that he's a molester, and also he may not even be Jewish. So tell us about this very strange story.
Yeah, so I first became aware of him many years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was, maybe 2012 or 2013. There was an article written about him in one of the Frum papers that was kind of commenting on how interesting it was that there was a convert who had adopted a bunch of children and were raising them as Hasidim. And, you know, in Texas, it was just an interesting story that I remember reading at the time. Years later, I saw them on social media, and, you know, I started following the family and, you know, watching the videos, and something always seemed a little bit off, but I couldn't really put my finger on it exactly. And then in about 2021, I think early 2021, we received a tip on social media about him having been arrested, and actually we received a tip about a civil lawsuit that he was facing for allegedly sexually abusing a foreign exchange student who was in his house. And it turns out when we looked into it that not only was there a civil case, there was a criminal case as well against him for the same crime. So I started looking into him, and all of this started coming out. You know, I talked to a bunch of people who had known him for many years. I looked into his background. I looked up his criminal records. I constructed a timeline of where he came from. You know, and his move from Odessa, Texas, where he was born, Jeffrey Lujan Vahil, to Houston, Texas, where he was now known as Chaim Nissen Cohen. And there's nothing I was able to find that indicates that he actually converted. So I don't think he's actually Jewish. And he's
Was his other name George Santos?
I mean, he may as well be. It's a very similar. He's about as Jewish as George Santos is, you know. So he's been running a number of scams over the years. One actually was brought to my attention recently that I hadn't known about earlier. In 2009, he was busted dressing up like some kind of rabbi, not a Frum rabbi, but some kind of rabbi, bilking people out of money, Christians out of money for you know, some house of worship he said he was building. He was going by the name of something Rosenberg. I don't remember exactly. Gabriel Rosenberg, yeah. And it was actually reported in a number of Texas papers, and Vasisnayas at the time had an article about it. And the picture in the Vasisnayas article does look very much like him, just a younger version. So he's been, you know, he's had a very troubling history in the past of you know, running scams, and obviously that pales in comparison to the crimes he's now accused of.
Which is, tell us exactly what he's been accused of, and how did he get to be caught doing that?
So he was, like I said, initially accused in 2019 criminally of sexually abusing a foreign exchange student who was living in his house. He
was known as Chaim at that moment in time? Was he still the Hasidic man that he purported to be during 2019? Yeah, did he convert, or did he put on this Hasidic act?
No, so the Hasidic thing has been going on for a while, at least since 2013, 2014. And he actually changed his name twice legally. He changed his name from from Jeffrey Lujan Vahil to Chaim Nisim Vahil, and then Chaim Nisim Cohen. And he's been running that identity since. So it's not a recent thing. It's been going on for a while. It was going on when the initial charges were filed, and he just kept it up since then. What has changed since then is that since those initial charges, being that he's been facing these two lawsuits, he suddenly seems to have developed a debilitating illness that was supposed to have killed him, a year and a half ago, that somehow hasn't. Now, according to the police report that was filed with some of the latest charges, he was lying about that illness, which, it's not the first lie, it's not his last lie. But basically what he's accused of is, as I said, sexually abusing the foreign exchange student. And then about 3 weeks ago, at the beginning of February, there was an outcry made by one of his victims to a podcast on this, this live podcasting app, an interactive live podcasting app. One of the victims of his called into this podcast and made a disclosure saying that he was being sexually abused by Cohen, and that there were a number of other children who were also being sexually abused. The host of the podcast called the police, who brought him in, and initially, according to the report, he had denied actually making the outcry because he was scared of coming forward. But when they played the recording back to him of the podcast, he admitted that, yeah, it was, he's the one who had called in. He disclosed the sexual abuse he was experiencing. He spoke about the abuse that the other victims were also facing, and Cohen was arrested, and he was charged with 2 high-level counts. It was first degree felonies, and he was supposed to be arraigned a week later. That ended up being pushed off because the district attorney interviewed a number of his other victims, about 5 of his other victims, and based on those, they filed about 7 or 8 new charges against him. All of them are very high-level felonies. So he's staring down many, many years in jail. Now, what I don't understand is, how did he get away portraying himself as a Hasidic man? Did he have any learning? Did he? I don't believe he spoke Yiddish. Did he know the customs? How did he just pass off? How does somebody just walk in, put on Hasidic garb, grow payas, wear a black velvet yarmulke, have a beard? How do you pull this off where nobody suspects and say, hey, this guy isn't really a Hasid? So it's an interesting question, and he definitely does have an interesting background. And from some of what I'm about to say is speculation, and some of it is stuff I verified. And I'll try to specify which is which. So in trying to piece together kind of where his obsession with Judaism came from, because he wasn't born Jewish, he was born to a non-Jewish family. And Odessa, Texas, and West Texas in general doesn't really have much in the way of Judaism, established Judaism, certainly not Orthodox Judaism. So it seems that the best guess right now from a number of people I've spoken to who are familiar with him, his background, and kind of the religious climate in the area, is that there's a lot of messianic activities. So Messianic Judaism, think Jews for Jesus kind of stuff going on there. And there are Christians who get caught up in the Jews for Jesus or adjacent movements, and start to be drawn into the orbit of what they believe Judaism is. For some of them, that's where they stay. For some of them, they eventually realize that Jews for Jesus is not actually Judaism, and they start to explore real Judaism, whether it's Orthodox, conservative, or Reform. And then some of them will convert, Orthodox, conservative, or Reform, or some of them will just leave the orbit entirely and go back to being Christian or become unaffiliated or whatever. And it seems that may have been his way in. Now, I've spoken to a number of people who have known him since he was saying he wanted to convert. He was affiliated for a while, for at least a couple of years in Dallas, with a shul there, with the Young Israel of Dallas, and the rabbi there. He used to attend classes there. So he has actually gotten something of a Jewish education. Obviously not to the extent where you or I would not see through it, because if you watch any of his videos, it's obvious that he's not, that he wasn't brought up with it. But didn't he claim that he spoke Yiddish in Brooklyn, that he grew up as a Yiddish speaker? Yeah, so his backstory is actually one of the most interesting things about this. Is that it was such a varied and changing thing. So it depends on when you would approach him. In different eras of his, of his life, he would give different stories. So more toward like 2012 or 2013, he would tell people he was looking to convert. But also around the same time, he started telling other stories. So some people, he said that he had grown up in Williamsburg or Borough Park, and he had grown up speaking Yiddish, exactly as you said. At some point, his story changed to say that his family had been brought over from Israel or from Yemen by Satmar, when Satmar was trying to bring over Yemenites to prevent them from being Zionists. They brought over Yemenites to show them what, to make sure that they stayed firm, essentially, was the goal. He claimed he was part of that. He very much wasn't. He claimed to somebody else that that he was raised in Texas and then moved to New York, and lived in Borough Park, and then he claimed to somebody else that he was born in Borough Park and moved to Texas for medical care or something. So this has been like a changing story. What I do know, though, is as of about 2014, 2015, he stopped claiming that he was a convert to anybody in public. Now, there are people who knew that was his story originally, but he started claiming, as you said, that he was raised Jewish. In fact, in every media article I was able to find online that where he had given an interview, he claimed that he was raised Jewish, and that and not only him and his children that he adopted were all raised in Yiddish speaking homes and Hebrew speaking homes. And that's very obviously not true. Anybody who watches their social media videos knows that that's not true.
And he also had different names, and not 2009, 2010. Before he came up to the name Chaim Nissen Cohen, he was Chaim Nissen Virgil, Gabriel Jeffrey Virgil, Gabriel Rosenberg, and then he decided on his name. So let me ask you this question: how does somebody who's not Jewish, who may be interested in Judaism, just decide, I'm going to pose as a Hasidic Jew without having the background? How does even, I know this is speculation, but how does it even enter to somebody's mind? Does he feel he can get away with molestation if he's paraded as a Hasidic man as opposed to somebody else? What's
so
the
I'm not sure how that relates to the abuse he committed. Meaning, it seems that before he was committing any abuse, he was focused on this identity. I don't know what about it appealed to him. But if he was coming out of the Messianic movement, he may have been looking for something to be a part of. Now, the influences that he had early on in his Jewish journey were not Hasidic, not at all. He was dealing with an Israeli young Israel rabbi. The people he was hanging out with were not Hasidic at that time. There's still not that many Hasidim in Texas, but there were fewer back then. So I don't know, maybe he picked it up from online, from reading Jewish media, like maybe he got his hands on Mishpacha Ami, Yated, and Hamadiyah and read them and saw that this is what Judaism is, and decided that that's the identity he wanted. But at some point, this identity did start becoming lucrative for him, because one of the reasons why the family had such a large following on social media, at least I'm speculating, but this is what it seems to me.
Didn't they have millions of hits?
Absolutely, yeah. And it seems that part of the interest and appeal was that this was such an interesting thing, that there was this family of adopted children in the sky who was Hasidic, who was raising them. And that, coupled with them being on social media and sort of being like Judaism influencers, and answering questions to people who were curious, and interacting with with various, like, from social media accounts, Jewish social media accounts, and really projecting a very interesting image. I think at some point it became lucrative for him to keep this up.
Amazing. It's just a strange story that we're looking at. Somebody who wasn't Jewish, masquerading as a Hasidic man, adopts 9 children, abuses them, and now is in hot water for sexual abuse. We're speaking with Usher Lovy. He's with the organization called Zaakah, and they work and deal with victims of sexual abuse. So
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
We're back. Usher Lovy is with an organization called Zaakah. They're dealing with sexual abuse. They're looking at the strange story of a man who masqueraded as a Hasidic single father, adopted 9 children, and it turns out that he is a molester. And we're looking at that strange story. And he, in fact, he came up with a bunch of different names before settling on a name. He picked the name Cohen of all names that he didn't find. Came with the name Chaim Nissen Cohen. He's not Jewish, but he masqueraded as a Jew. Usher, we'll take some email questions. Let's take an email question. I think BC writes, who has custody of these children, and are they even Jewish?
So right now it's a mix. Some of the children at the time were adults, so they have custody of themselves. There are.
How old were they if they're considered adults?
I'm not going to comment on the ages of the kids because they're public figures, and therefore, it's very easy to identify them based on very little information, and I think that they deserve their privacy in this. So I'm just going to say that the older kids, the ones who are adults are kind of on their own. He's in jail, right? So they kind of have custody of themselves because they're adults, and the younger children who are not are being taken care of by Texas CPS.
Tell us about Zaakah, your organization, because I know you've been very involved, invested in this case, but you're involved in other cases too. Should tell us about your organization.
Yeah, so we've been around since about 2012, and we exist to advocate for survivors of sexual abuse in the frum community. What we do is basically we provide resource referrals to survivors of sexual abuse. We also inform the community about ongoing cases and keep them up to date. We also provide educational resources, information about how to keep children safe, how to prevent sexual abuse, how to report it if it chas v'shalom happens, the proper responses. And we also run this is a little separate from the rest of what we do. We also run a Shabbos and Yom Tov mental health peer support hotline that started around the first lockdown during COVID, the first Pesach during lockdown, when we were facing that mental health crisis. We started a hotline that has kept going for every Shabbos and Yom Tov if people need to call in because they need someone to talk to for mental health reasons. They can give us a call on our hotline, and we have people 24 hours on Shabbos, and it's supervised by Rav Yosef Blau from Yeshiva University, just to make sure that that everything's in order. Yeah.
And how big have things changed? Because there was a while when you couldn't talk about sexual abuse. Today you can. So is there not only more of awareness, are there less problems or more problems because there's more awareness? So
we have made some progress in the sense, as you said, that it used to be, you weren't even allowed to say the word sexual abuse. Now we talk about it a lot more as a community. So in that sense, things have definitely gotten better. We still have a long way to go, though. Unfortunately, in many corners of the frum world, there's still the expectation that you have to ask a Rav for permission before reporting sexual abuse, which is absolutely wrong, but it's still the understood policy in many places. Aguda actually has on Cross Currents, they have a psak that they put out from 2011 that says explicitly that you have to ask a Rav before reporting sexual abuse. So this sort of thing still continues. There are still cases that come to us where people have reported or tried to report and have faced very serious consequences. And when these cases come to us, we try to provide the support that's needed to encourage people to come forward anyway. But yeah, things are slowly changing. We're talking about it more, and that's a very good start, but there's still a lot more that needs to be done.
Now, in the case of Chaim Nissen Cohen, according to the reports, he adopted 9 boys. But the fact is, though, he also hosted multiple foreign exchange students. At one point, there were 11 boys with Cohen in his 4-bedroom house. How was he allowed to adopt all these kids?
I can't tell you. And honestly, I think that's one of the things that needs to be investigated very strongly about this, because any adoption agency and any state agency that allowed him to get that many boys And not only that, not only is it an insane number of kids to adopt, in a house that was that small. He had reported, the income he's been reporting for all these years. He had to give financial statements to the foreign exchange company, which, by the way, only according to their rules, you're only allowed to have one at a time. And he got one from one company and one from another company, which is not allowed. He also failed to disclose his criminal records. He's been lying about his finances to all of these agencies. And in some cases, they actually had proof of that and they didn't do anything. So there's an incredible lack of due diligence on the part of the adoption agencies, on the part of the foreign exchange agencies, and on the part of Child Protective Services. For all these years, they've been doing investigations of this guy. And what's been happening is, from what's come out, it seems, is that, and this is unfortunately common, what's uncommon is that it happens 8 times, is that Child Protective Services will get a report that something's going on. So they'll come to the home to do an inspection to see if there's anything wrong. And the abuser will line all the kids up, threaten them, make sure that they say the right things when Child Protective Services is there, put on a great show that everything is wonderful. Child Protective Services files a report that they found nothing, and then the case is closed. They don't actually spend any more time investigating. And that seems to be what happened in this case, because anybody else who had come to the home, and there were a number of people I spoke to who had been in the home, saw that something was wrong. In fact, one person who had been invited into the home immediately after leaving called Child Protective Services, says, "I think these kids are being neglected." So there's definitely a lot of accountability that has to happen in this case, not just for him, but for the people who enabled him, for the people who gave him those kids and turned a blind eye.
Now, explain this to me, because from what I understand, it's not easy to adopt kids. You have to go through a whole procedure, and it takes time. It's complicated. Is it different in Texas? Because that he was able to adopt so many kids with ease, and he was able to skirt the rules. So yes, there should be an investigation, but I thought it was complicated, and it seems like he was able to pull it off so easily.
So he wasn't exactly necessarily following the process, right? So just to give one example, this is how he managed to get the foreign exchange students, right? One of the things that you have to do in order to host a foreign exchange student is you have to pass a criminal background check. Now, he has a criminal record that he didn't bother to disclose. It's very easy to find. I found it. I found it inside of a half hour when I started investigating.
Or one of his other names.
No, under Jeffrey Vahill. So if you do any brief amount of Googling, you find that he was born Jeffrey Lujan Vahill in Odessa, Texas. If you go to the Odessa, Texas, the county that Odessa, Texas is in, and you look up their court records, they have criminal records going back for many years. If you input that name, you'll find that he was arrested a number of times for writing bad checks. So he pleaded guilty to all 3 counts. He has a criminal record. He didn't bother to disclose that. Also, when he was applying for the foreign exchange student, the references he gave weren't actually references. He wrote down names, and then he gave cell phone numbers that it turns out were owned by him. So he was giving himself as a reference, right? So he's not exactly being honest and forthcoming. I think it's more a lack of due diligence on the part of these agencies to really double check everything that was going on. But another thing that he was doing is that he's not just, he's a pretty accomplished scam artist, and one of the scams, this is the way I characterized one of the scams he was running, was kind of like a confidence game on Child Protective Services, a number of the other agencies. There were many experts that were in and out of that house. They would do a lot of, he even did a video, I think it was in 2015, on child sexual abuse and healing from trauma and how to deal with it, which is incredibly ironic. He had done many videos with therapists, with licensed therapists. He had done events with local cops. He had done events with local CPS. And he kind of ingratiated himself in the community of people who would be the ones responsible for overseeing him and preventing him from getting more kids and preventing him from abusing them and busting him if he did, which we now know he did. And I think they were all kind of taken in by him to the point where in March 2022, after we had broken the story about the lawsuit and criminal charges regarding the foreign exchange student, there was a video that so just as a side note, he was in control of the TikTok accounts the entire time. So he had his kids make a TikTok video basically saying, like, you may have heard that something's going on. It's not true. It's all libel. they're making stuff up about us. And then they brought on this licensed social worker named Kimberly Brown, who had done a bunch of other videos with them in the past, and they had her say basically, this is the safest house I've ever seen. These kids have the best environment, the safest environment. It's great for them. I've seen nothing going on. So she's essentially giving a hechsher on him after he's, while he's in court defending himself against sexual abuse charges, which is ridiculous. I mean, any therapist who does that, any social worker who does that, should immediately have their license taken away from them, because that's a wildly irresponsible thing to do. It's not for her to make a determination whether the sexual abuse happens. That's for the courts to decide. And it's not for her to give a hechsher on him while that process is going on.
But he also was a master of public relations. He received fawning press coverage in places such as the Use of the Family magazine, the Jewish Herald Voice, the Jewish Press, a local Fox News affiliate. So he was able to get the media to present him as being and the family in a favorable light, which helped perpetuate that scam.
Yeah, he definitely did come off as, like if you didn't look too deep, he would come off as, a loving family man who was very intuitive and understanding and empathetic, and and really just that he came off seeming like a really good person. To some people, to the press. To other people, who saw his stuff and just the general setup and the vibe of what was going on with him, people came away with a bad taste in their mouth and suspicions about what was going on, because it seems like a little too polished, a little too done up. But yeah, he was definitely able to charm a lot of people, and that's I think an important thing to realize in a lot of these cases, is that abusers are, people think of abusers as like the weird, creepy guy that you could spot from a mile away. It's usually not those guys. It's usually the ones who everybody likes, because what they do and what their talent is that they're able to not only groom the children, into trusting them and not wanting to report them and getting them ready for the abuse psychologically, but they also groom the communities around them, right? So the people who would be in charge of getting him in trouble, of realizing that something's wrong and coming after him, he was grooming them as well. He was grooming his audience on TikTok by using his kids, to the point that when we were posting court documents about the accusations against him for sexually abusing this foreign exchange student, we were posting actual court documents, and the people in his audience were saying, oh no, we know it's not true. We know it's not true. They had never read any of the court documents, even though we were providing them, right? That's grooming a community to be ready to help in the enabling of abuse, or at least look away, when there's obviously something wrong. Now, I'm not saying that people necessarily have to look at like an open court case and immediately assume that, the verdict is guilty, right? There is a legal process and it should be followed. However, people should have their eyes open about it. People should read this stuff, evaluate it, make their decisions based on information, not because the person accused of committing the sexual abuse is somebody that you recognize from social media.
But also part of what he did was he looked the part. He looks Hasidic. I saw the videos, the pictures. He also said to be a rabbi. So if you're in a place where there are no Jews or very few Jews, and you come dressed the part, with the tzitzis hanging out and the beard and the black vest and the white shirt, and you say you're a rabbi, so people say, ooh, they're oohed and awed with it. So they get lulled to saying, hey, this person is.
Well, yeah, maybe in the non-Jewish media sources, but I mean, any Jewish media source should immediately recognize that that's a lie. And yet there was a lot of fawning coverage of him in Jewish media sources as well. And not only that, there were rabbis and speakers and various from initiatives and organizations. I'm not going to name the most recent one because they don't deserve to be dragged into this, but who were involved with him, who would make videos with them, who would visit the house and stuff. There were people who were taken in by this, even though you scratch the surface and you could plainly tell he's lying, because he's not capable. Now, this is not a knock on Balei Tshuva or Gerim, chas v'shalom, but there's a difference between somebody who learns Hebrew later on in life and somebody who grows up speaking it, right? So anybody who grows up speaking Hebrew is able to say challah, Shabbos, Shatchen, without sounding different. They sound like the community that they're part of, right? Because a native speaker always sounds a little more polished in the language than someone who adopts it later. If you listen to him speaking Hebrew or trying to speak Hebrew or trying to speak Yiddish, it's very clear that he didn't grow up speaking it. So that at least puts the lie to, that doesn't foreclose the possibility that he's a convert, or a Baal Tshuva or something, but it does foreclose the possibility that he was born into this. He very clearly wasn't. And anybody who heard him say that and then heard him speak should have known that he was lying. And if somebody's lying to you about something that fundamental, you shouldn't trust them any further. And yet people did. All these papers were writing about him. All these people were associating with him.
No, very, very, very true. Now, was he always a molester? Did he start at a later date? I'm just trying to get a handle because he's been dealing with these kids for a while. Was it something of more recent vintage, or was he that way from the get-go?
So from what I'm able to see from the court filings, it seems like the abuse of his victims had been ongoing for a while. It also seems that the outcry that was made on the podcast recently was pretty much a direct result of the bravery of the foreign exchange student in coming forward. He kind of set everything in motion. But yeah, it seems like it was ongoing, at least according to the allegation that was made on the podcast and in the court documents, that the abuse was pretty much nonstop from the beginning, of the victims knowing Cohen. So yeah, that definitely wasn't just new. It wasn't something that started. I don't know which came first for him. Whether it came first that he was abusing kids and then he adopted kids to be able to have victims in house or nearby, or the opposite. But he has been abusing children for at least allegedly abusing children, according to these court documents, for a number of years.
Well, I guess we'll see what happens next. He just got arrested. He's going to be arraigned. There's going to be a trial coming up, I would assume.
So it's interesting you mentioned that the arraignment keeps being pushed off because they keep adding new charges. So he was supposed to be arraigned on Friday the 23rd, and it got pushed off because they added another 7 or 8 charges. So he has another court date scheduled for mid-March, and I guess we'll see if there's anything more that gets added in the meantime. He is claiming, he's still on this canard that he's, sick to the point of needing hospice care. According to the victim that made the outcry, that's not true. He's feigning illness because, he's trying to use it as an excuse to get out of his initial court case. But yeah, this is definitely, I don't think they're done figuring out exactly what the extent of his crimes are, but there's no question about it. This case is going to progress. And as you said, the steps are he's going to be arraigned, and it's going to go into pretrial. He does have an attorney. I don't see, honestly, in my experience, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to give my opinion based on my experience. Given the number of charges, the amount of proof, I don't see a way out of this for him. I would be shocked if he actually took it to trial. Any plea deal he would take is not going to give him any leniency, as far as I can tell. It would be just to spare the embarrassment and hassle of a trial. This man, if there's any justice in this world, is going to die in prison, and that's what that's what should happen to him. And like I said, with the number of charges he's facing and the seriousness of these crimes and the number of people willing to testify against him, I have no doubt that that's what's going to happen.
I'm curious if he's demanding kosher food in prison there. I'm sure they don't probably the kosher food program in the jail where he is. We're in that part of Texas, right?
Well, actually, Houston does have a lot of Jews.
He's in Houston.
And does have a lot of from. Yeah.
I thought it was one of the smaller towns where there were very few Jews, but he's in a Houston jail. Do we know if he's asking for kosher food? That would be a telltale sign.
That's an interesting question, and actually, I hadn't considered that, and I'm going to pass it on to the reporters who are working on the story. Maybe they could find out from the prison.
Correct. And finally, also, while he was masquerading as a Hasidic man, you mentioned he was in parts of Texas where there are really no Jews, Orthodox conservative or reform. Was he also a part of the charade? Did he actually eat kosher food, or just was eating regular food and just masquerading? Because obviously he didn't care about the religion. He just used that as a subterfuge to do his crimes.
So I I'm actually not sure about that. So just to clarify, he was from the timeline I was able to construct, the dressing like a chassid thing did start already when he was starting to get involved with normative frumkeit, right? So that was when he was in Dallas. I don't know about what he was doing when actually the picture that I have from him from 2009 when he was posing as Gabriel Rosenberg and scamming people out of money shows that he wasn't dressed like a chassid at that point. So that must have started in about 2010 or 2011. And at that point, he was already in Dallas, which does have a Jewish community. I was talking about Odessa, Texas, which is where he was raised. But honestly, I don't know if it was only an act to be able to abuse kids. It's possible that there was something in him that had a connection with it, because it seems that the practice in the house, at least if the social media is to be believed, the practice in the house was at least something approaching something looking like frumkeit. So I don't know if they if there was like a fake thing going on when nobody was looking and then the real thing on camera. I have no idea. And I do know that he did attend shiurim from a rav in Texas, in Dallas, who does a lot of conversion. So at some point he was like on a conversion track. It doesn't seem he ever finished it. And I don't know. There's no indication that he finished it. All the people I spoke to who knew back then say he didn't finish it and that he's not actually Jewish. And to me, the biggest tell is that he chose the last name Cohen, because there's not a single conversion rabbi I know who would allow a ger to take the name Cohen. It just wouldn't happen.
It's a strange story. Anyway, I'm sure there's going to be more coming out. And maybe you're right. Maybe he was interested in becoming a Jew, but he's a scam artist. He's certainly committed crimes. He's abused children. He's done other crimes as well. So I'm not sure what motivated him to become a Jew and continue these crimes. If he learned anything about Judaism, he should have learned what the Judaism is all about. But I guess maybe compartmentalized. He wanted to be Jewish, but he wanted to continue with the way of doing things. I guess we'll learn more as time goes on.
Yeah.
Is there any communication with him while he's in prison? Any reporters or anybody else that's doing a story that's following up and with him?
I haven't seen any reports that have had any interaction with him. Obviously there are quotes from lawyers, from his lawyers in court. And, that's typically how this stuff works. I usually someone who's pending trial like this wouldn't comment, or rather their lawyer wouldn't let them comment, but also I don't know if he's inclined to. I certainly haven't seen anything from him.
Lovy with an organization called Zaakah, helping those victims of sexual abuse. If people want to learn more about what your organization does, how can they do so?
So you can find us at our website, zaakah.org. It's spelled ZAAKAH.org. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you search for Zaakah, ZAAKAH. And we also have a podcast called Outcry, which is available on every podcast app.
Anyway, thank you for telling us the bizarre story of Chaim Nissen Cohen, who pretended to be an Orthodox Jew, pretended to be a Hasidic Jew, molested kids. I don't even know if they were Jewish, according to some of the newspaper accounts that I've seen, but he got away with it up until now, just arrested. Thank you for commenting on the story, and we look forward to having you back on a future broadcast.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on, and have a good Vach.
You too. And we've been looking at the bizarre story of a man